So this morning, I think it's appropriate for us to also read from Hebrews, the other lesson that's ascribed for today. And so if you want to take out your sheets this morning that have the lectionary on it, and on the backside, the second reading for today is from Hebrews. And here's what Hebrews says: "Let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that some have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember those who are in prison as though they were in prison with them, those who are being tortured as though yourselves were being tortured. Let marriage be held in honor by all, and let the marriage bed be kept undefiled, for God will judge fornicators and adulterers. Keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have, for he has said, 'I will never leave you or forsake you.' So we can say with confidence, 'The Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can anyone do to me?' Remember your leaders, those who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Through him, then, let us continually offer a sacrifice of praise to God, that is, the fruit of lips that confess his name. Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God." The word of the Lord. So I had a sermon all prepared for you, and then yesterday happened. So I have 3 stories for you from yesterday that just changed everything that God had put in my heart earlier in this week, and then quickly gelled into something for today. It was a tough day yesterday, wasn't it? As I was pondering the news of another shooting here in Texas, 5 people killed and 21 injured, it was a tough day. A good friend of mine is the rector of the church at West Palm Beach, Florida. And I've been texting him, and it's a tough day for him, trying to decide whether or not they're going to keep services going when a hurricane is off the coast and Dorian seems to be gaining more and more strength. A tough day. And more tough days to come as we see the funerals of the people who were killed, and as we see the destruction that Dorian will bring to the coast, the East Coast. But at the same time that it was a really tough day, I was sitting and watching television with my daughter yesterday late afternoon, and the U.S. Open tennis tournament was on. And that was pretty incredible. And here's what was incredible about it. The tennis was great, but the number one tennis women's singles player in the world is Naomi Osaka, and she was playing Coco Gauff. Have you heard of Coco? The 15-year-old United States, rising star who is just an incredible tennis player, knows how to come from behind and win, and is just doing incredible things. It's amazing. And so we were watching this match, and it was hard fought. It wasn't close at all. Naomi Osaka, being 10 years older than her opponent. I mean, can you believe that? And she's in her mid-20s, and she's 10 years older than her opponent. Beat Coco 6-3, 6-0. But here was the most incredible thing after the match. Typically, after a match, the person who lost packs up their stuff and walks off the court. And that leaves the winner to have an after-match interview, and then they hit some balls into the stands, and they throw their wristbands in there and everything else. And it's a moment for the winner to be in the limelight and to celebrate. After they both shook the hands of the referee, Naomi immediately went over to Coco and said, "Stay. Stay in the arena and come do the interview with me." That's amazing, folks. And when they did the interview, both Coco and Naomi paid tribute to each other for their friendship and for what each other gives to them and how that improves them as players and that kind of thing. And both of them paid tribute to the other players' parents. Now that was amazing. Both were crying and both were so humble in how they shared the grace with each other, even as opponents, even as tennis challengers to each other. Cooper and I sat there just crying, and I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to put this in the sermon because it totally goes with the lessons today. All of our lessons today talk to us about how we are to live a radical life following Jesus of humility. Humility. Center court is not ours to be had alone. Center court is where we invite our opponents in to be there in the center with us, celebrating the gift and skill of being able to play tennis. Center court is a place where we come where we can extend hospitality and grace to one another, even in defeat and victory. That whole way of life is totally different than what the culture would have you and I do. Society and culture would say, take what is yours and celebrate it and be number one. Always be number one. Take your place at the dinners, right up near the stage, if not on the stage. The society and culture would say, take what is yours in your business and make sure that you have the most money and the most clout and the most PR. And Jesus is saying to us today, and so is the writer of Hebrews, that we are called to a radical way of life of hospitality and humility that's very different from what the culture is inviting us into. So this weekend is always a very special weekend for me because August 31st is St. Aidan's Day. And I know you're probably going, so? Well, it's important to me because in 2002, Bishop Claude Payne of the Diocese of Texas invited my family to move from downtown Houston out to Cyprus to start a new church. And for 6 months, as we started that church, it was called the Northwest Houston Episcopal Fellowship. That's really exciting, isn't it? So, but we grew. It was pretty amazing. We had 26 people at our first worship service, and by the time we went to Christmas Eve, from September to Christmas Eve, we had over 80 people in our house, to the place where on Christmas Eve I had to serve communion on my front porch because there was no room in our house. And Bishop Payne heard about that, and he called me a couple weeks later, the beginning of 2003, and he said, it's time that we give you a name. And I said, well, my name's Justin. And he goes, no, the church a name. And okay. I'm like, I didn't know when I became a vicar of a church plant that I was going to be renamed. But he said, no, we need a church name. He said, give me 5 suggestions. And so I thought about that and worked with our leadership team, and we gave the bishop 5 suggestions. And 2 weeks later, we got an email from him. And the 6th suggestion, which we never made to him, is the name of the church. And he said, I want you to report back to me on what you find out about St. Aidan. He said, the church is going to be named St. Aidan's, not Grace or Triumphant Love or Beautiful River. Those were some of the names that funky names, so Hindu. Yes. It turns out that Aidan was the number one boy's name in Harris County that year. That was awesome. And the number 3 girl's name in Harris County that year. So we had a bunch of little Aidans running around the church throughout the time that I was there, which was great. But what I did is I did research St. Aidan because I was thinking, why would the bishop give us this name of an unknown saint that we would have to spend a lot of time explaining who he was? And here's the deal. One of his friends, one of Aidan's friends at Iona, was called to become the bishop of Lindisfarne, England. And he got there and he said, these people are horrible. And he went back to Iona and said, Aidan, you're up. It's your gig. And so Aidan went, and he became the first bishop of Lindisfarne in that area on the east side of England. And he walked from town to town. He never rode a horse. This was in like the 350s. Never rode a horse because he never wanted to be elevated above the people. He always wanted to be able to connect with people eye to eye. And he would walk up to somebody and say, "Do you know Jesus?" And if they said yes, he would say, "That is awesome. There's a church being started down the road. Come at 2:00 today." You go up to another person and say, "Do you know Jesus?" And they'd say no. And he goes, "That is awesome. There's a church starting down the road at 2:00 today." And so he did that. He went from town to town to town, and he planted churches all over the place. Church after church after church, inviting people, no matter what their response was to "Do you know Jesus?" No matter what their response was, he invited them to church because he knew that when someone got into a community of faith, that their hearts and minds would be transformed. That through relationship, there would be transformation. And through transformation, then, they would have the opportunity to actually disciple people. And then through discipleship, people would be encouraged to go out into the community and give back to the community and invite other people into a life of faith. Well, the core values for St. Aidan's Episcopal Church in Cypress, Texas, was relationships, transformation, discipleship, and outreach. Bishop Payne knew. Thank God for bishops. He knew. He knew exactly what we needed to be named in order to help us live out our core values. But here's another cool thing about what Aidan did. When the prince of the Lindisfarne area was a Christian himself, the first Christian prince of that area. And so every time the prince had a dinner party, he invited Aidan to be there because Aidan was his bishop. And so Aidan would come in and he would take the lowest seat at the table. Even though as a bishop, he could have taken the seat right next to the prince. He took the lowest seat, partly because he actually wanted to take his plate of food and pour it into his satchel and give that satchel to somebody to actually take outside and share with the people on the streets. Because see, back in those days, the servants were told that the plate could never be empty. So as soon as Aidan would empty the plate in his satchel and he put it down, more food would be put on. And over a period of a 2 or 3 hour dinner, 20 to 30 people would be fed outside the walls of the castle of the prince. Aidan was a servant. Aidan knew that even if people weren't invited to the banquet, they could partake in the banquet. But Aidan did his part to invite people into the banquet feast. Y'all, that's what we're about. You and I, if we want to truly call ourselves Christians and disciples, then we are to extend that radical hospitality and that abundant love of Jesus Christ and invite people to the banquet feast. No matter who they are or where they come from or how much money they have or don't have, whether they're employed or not employed, whether they're from this country or not, whoever they are, we are to invite them to this banquet feast. And when we invite people to come, we are to exalt them to the highest place because they have gifts and skills and love that they can give to us. We don't relegate them to the lowest place. We take that lowest place so that others may be exalted in God's great, abundant love. Here's how this works. 3 weeks ago at Sidewalk Saturday, Denise showed up, strung out on drugs and not feeling very good about herself. She got a breakfast taco and she was given a place to sit, and people who volunteered sat down and spoke with her and helped her kind of listen and talk through what she was going through. But at the end of the morning, after she had her bag of food and some clothing, because she didn't come in with a whole bunch of clothing and she needed some extra clothing, and we outfitted her, and she actually went into the restroom and changed into some of the clothing that we had given her. She came back out, and most of the people had dispersed by that time, and she came up to Richard Albanese and to myself, and she said, "I'm afraid to leave." I'm afraid to leave. Because if I leave, I'm going to go and take drugs again. I'm afraid to go. And so we were able to get her into University Hospital, into the detox program. And 5 days later, we were able to get her into Alpha Home here, right down the street. And Richard Albanese happens to be on the board of directors there, and he was going there this past week for a board meeting, and he walked in, and there was Denise. Totally transformed. The light of Christ was alive in her life. Richard had never actually made eye contact with her because she had hung her head the whole time out of shame and guilt. But when he walked in last week, her head was held high. She looked Richard straight in the eye and said, "Thank you, I'm a totally new person." She was exalted to the highest place at the banquet table because we extended radical hospitality to her. It's how it works. It's uncomfortable. It's not the normal. But when we call ourselves Christians, we are called into a place like Aidan, to empty the food into your satchel so that others can be fed before you even take a bite. To walk the streets at eye level, not thinking so highly of ourselves, but humbly walking, inviting people into a relationship with us